Hello, everybody, and welcome to another installment of the M2M Show podcast. I'm Paul Yeager. Glad to have you here. This week, we are going to have an exit interview of sorts with a former member of the USDA who has Iowa ties and who's also been a former guest on this podcast. So a reunion of sorts with Bill Northey, and he had a nice title with USDA. He was Undersecretary for Farm Production and Conservation. And before that, he was Secretary of Agriculture in the state of Iowa, served a couple of terms there, and then went to Washington, D.C. We'll talk about what life was like in Washington. Oh, COVID changed things, how USDA quickly evolved and pivoted as they tried to keep people fed and producers in operation. I want to let you know, if you value the work that we do, now is the time in PBS land to support the work that we do, and you can visit markettomarket.org/donate. And there are ways that you can make your contribution. And then we have a couple of ways to say thank you. And this would be one of the items that we're holding, or what I'm holding right now, is a cell phone stand. And if you watch Iowa PBS, you've seen how we have talked about that. And over my shoulder are some past gifts. We've done trucks in the past. There's going to be a new hat, new coat, to have a way to say, I support Market to Market. This is the M2M Show podcast, which is under that umbrella of Market to Market as well as Iowa PBS. But now let's have our discussion with former Undersecretary Bill Northey. It always has to start with food, Bill. Did you have a favorite place to eat when you were out in D.C.? Did you even have time to do that?
I really thought after spending time traveling out there and always eating out that we'd spend time eating out when we were out there. But you know what? It's regular life and you work late and you're just glad to get home. And we had a few visitors that came and went. But a few places probably, we went out on weekends quite a bit, out to see farms. And so really fancy place called the Waffle House. You know, the Waffle House, that was probably our most common visit as we were traveling. We'd either eat there or pick it up to go. And we don't have those here in the Midwest very much. I'm not sure where the closest one is. I haven't Googled that yet.
I'm going to guess it's Columbia, Missouri. That's the closest one I think I've been to, because Columbia is, at least from where you and I are sitting, St. Louis isn't as close. It's more Columbia.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's worth a road trip just for the Waffle House, but it certainly was worth a stop when we saw them.
Well, the butter on everything that they do is worth it. I think of the hash browns. And so I guess since you're not a public official, I can ask this time, were you sober when you went into the Waffle House? Because half the clientele isn't when they go in.
I think I noticed some that weren't, but we were mostly there during the day, midday, and most of the folks were, and I certainly was.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, during the day. Yeah, that's totally different than it is at night. Yeah. But did you hear about this? Can you shed any light about the Waffle House Index? You've heard of this, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah,
is it true that the government, it's the government, from what I understand, they keep tabs on the severity of a storm if the Waffle House stays open? So you're telling me that's true?
That's what I hear. Now, we didn't at USDA, but I hear that Homeland Security does, or others, FEMA does, or somebody, and they look and they see if Waffle Houses stayed open, then it wasn't so bad. The hurricane wasn't as bad as it could have been versus those that weren't. And now, we didn't have Waffle Houses here when the derecho went through, so I guess we didn't have that to measure how bad it was, but they do try and stay open, and they have a great little model, very efficient, and certainly good food and good hash browns.
So was the main part of your job, your title, it's a great LinkedIn line, Undersecretary for Farm Production and Conservation. I guess let's start with what that meant.
So at USDA, you have a secretary and a deputy secretary, and then you have different mission areas. Our mission area was called Farm Production and Conservation. Each mission area has some agencies in them. And the agencies that we had were Farm Service Agency, which is the farm programs, including farm loans, this coronavirus food assistance program, those kinds of things. And we had NRCS, Natural Resources Conservation Service, so the conservation programs, cost share, technical assistance, and then Risk Management Agency. And so the crop insurance, the federal government portion of it, of course, is delivered through private companies and private agents. But we had about 22,000 people, about 3,000 offices around the country. Certainly for most farmers, they have interaction with this FPAC family one way or the other.
How did that differ, the Sonny Perdue USDA versus, say, the Tom Vilsack version 1? As we sit here, we're about to have him voted in for his second, well, technically third tour, because he did do 2 tours under Obama. But how different of an infrastructure, like, did someone have your position during Vilsack and previous administrations?
Not exactly. So the previous combination was Farm Service Agency, Risk Management Agency, and Foreign Ag Service. And so it had the trade, all the trade discussion in the offices overseas. NRCS was over with Forest Service. In the Farm Bill in 2014, Congress said, we want a trade position separate from the other responsibilities. And so when the secretary came in, it really wasn't probably convenient for Secretary Vilsack to do that. He already had people lined up, and so he didn't implement that. But Secretary Perdue did. And he said, okay, we'll make, in this case, it was Ted McKinney, who was Undersecretary for Foreign, and now I lost, FTAA, Foreign Trade Agency. And then pulled NRCS in with FSA, saying, you know, we have these county offices that are out there together. We have policies that are impacting farmers. We had 2 different undersecretaries that sometimes wouldn't agree on what a beginning farmer was, or, you know, on some other things. And so in this case, let's put them under one. And if they don't agree, then we'll call him in and make sure that he gets them to agree. To the extent that you can. There are different laws in some cases. Certainly Farm Bill asks for some different things. But for the most part, we were able to bring that together in a very constructive, very good way. I was very happy with that arrangement.
Now, I'm not saying like the chief of staff. We know the chief of staff of any administration is extremely important. But are you then in like the top 5 to 10 rung of USDA? Does that, given I cannot even remember the layer that was underneath Secretary Perdue, but you sound like you're pretty high up, that there weren't many layers you had to go through to get an audience with the boss.
There weren't. You're right. There's certainly folks that are responsible for the secretary's time. So you have a chief of staff that needs to know that you're important enough to be able to take the secretary's time. And but you know, the secretary was not one for a lot of layers either, in actuality as well as practicality. So he would just call me up when he's out traveling and tell me, hey, I heard this about a farm loan, you know, in Georgia. What's going on? Is there an issue here? Is that something we need to check on, or we got a policy problem or whatever? And so we'd have a conversation about it, as well as we take many of our policy pieces into the secretary too, and he would engage in those. So you have the secretary, deputy secretary, that was Steve Sinsky with Secretary Perdue, and then 8 of us undersecretaries. So we're all right there. You know, we're all different sizes, we're all different structures as far as like the way it rolls down. If the secretary's gone, then the deputy secretary's in charge. If the deputy secretary and the secretary are gone, it actually rolls to FPAC as someone who needs to sign things and do other kinds of things.
Oh, that doesn't mean that you went in. It doesn't mean you went into the office and spun around in his chair?
No.
Oh,
didn't do that. And even if I did, I wouldn't say it because he may be watching, you know, so I couldn't possibly say it.
So was your office then, I mean, USDA has a big footprint in the DC area. So where physically, for those that have been there, What was your window like? What were you more the street side, the mall side? Where was it?
Yep. So I was on the street side of Witten Building. So at USDA, you have Independence that runs just south of the mall. So the mall there is between the Capitol and Washington Monument. We were down at the Washington Monument end. That's where the USDA buildings are. And then you have a big south building that has 4,000 or 5,000 people in it. Not now because of COVID, but normally. And then you have the Witten Building, which is right along the mall. And I was in the Witten Building. That's kind of called the headquarters building, with archways named for two Iowans, across Independence Avenue and a tunnel underneath. So once you're into either building. But my office looked towards the street, towards actually had a great view of a parking lot.
Oh, good.
Right between the street and the building. But there were some other great views in that building, just not out of my window. But I didn't need it a lot anyway. Had stuff to do.
Was your view better in Iowa out of the Wallace?
It really probably wasn't. No, in the Wallace Building, the secretary's office is way on the west side of the building, the opposite end of the Capitol. With a whole lot of your folks out in front. You got nice glass windows so that you can see them, but you can't possibly see the Capitol. Now, the DNR office in the Wallace Building is a great office, or a great office looking out on the Capitol. But both of them were great because they were around a lot of good people, but not because of the scenery out the window.
Well, and that's okay. You've got stuff you've got to do. And I get that that's an important, those that work in the White House, you always hear about, where's your office from steps to the Oval, or John Deere, it was how many panels did you have in your office at the Rusty Palace there in Moline? When you were Secretary of Agriculture in Iowa for a number of years, did you anticipate that you would have that job forever? I mean, there's always political aspirations about, well, what am I going to do? Am I going to stay in this job? Am I going to move on to something different, represent in Congress, represent in Senate? How did this position come about where Sonny Perdue, who got a little bit of a late head start in ag, make that contact with you? How well did you know him before you got the position?
He reached out, and I was in for something else, and we had a lunch together and a good conversation about kind of his philosophy and the things that he did in Georgia, about the experiences in Iowa and the things that we went through here in Iowa. And it felt like a great match from the beginning. And our conversation takes 2 hours or a little bit more, and just is a great feel. I actually haven't had many bosses. I mean, I had all of Iowans when I was Secretary of Ag. You run, but you're actually not responsible directly to the governor. You're working with them all the time, but not a real boss that says you're going to do X even if you don't like it, because that's what we need to do. And so to me, it was a fairly high bar to leave a great job. To go in, and the secretary exceeded that bar. We had several conversations, and then he has this kind of puzzle that he's got to put together, right? He doesn't want 7 Iowans, and he doesn't want 7 people from the same experience, and they got to fit the experience of what he's looking for. And so he put pieces together, and he talked about what he wanted, and from the very beginning, he was thinking evidently of me for this position without this position even really completely existing at the time. And so it was just a great fit. In fact, one of the things that the secretary said as we were winding down in a group conversation, he said, what the role of a secretary is? It's chief people picker. And it really is, it's a big place. And one person doesn't run it. One person sets a tone, definitely. President and the secretary both set tones there. But you have a lot of other people. And I would certainly say he would say, I'm going to be judged by the people I pick. And so he took his time. I certainly, I'm biased, but I thought it was a great crew of folks that I got to work with. And I was just pleased to be one of those folks that could participate and help and carry out the role for a while.
There are certain people that stay at any government agency regardless of who's in the White House or who the secretary is. What's the percentage of people that turn over from administration to administration?
So it'd be different in different places. It's the vast majority of the people stay. The difference, we call them political, are the political appointees. In my case, it was political appointment, also requiring a Senate confirmation. In other cases, a political appointment that doesn't require Senate confirmation. And then career employees. In our area of FPAC, we have one state director of Farm Service Agency that's a political appointee in every state. So that's 50 folks, and plus Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands and those combinations, but about 50 folks. And then we probably have another 20, maybe. So it's less than 100 out of 22,000. The rest of the folks stay. They're still signing up folks for CRP. They're still looking at ARC PLC sign up. They're still carrying those things out. They're still running rules over to OMB. Politicals set tones, make some political decisions, kind of set some priorities. But much of this is certainly carried out by the career folks that are there that last well beyond any political folks that come and go.
And I would imagine it's rare that a political appointee goes from one administration to another unless that is a super good fit or prior relationship. But if it is an alternation of parties, which we've had here in the last 3 cycles, some might stay. I mean, I'm guessing you might know the former Secretary of Ag, now about to be the new Secretary of Ag.
Yep.
Was there any consideration of telling Secretary Vilsack, hey, I'm available?
You know, I think I think it really is good for a secretary to have their team that carries out kind of their vision and their pieces. I certainly enjoyed my time there, but part of it was the things that we were working on based on the secretary and the kind of the priorities. I think that there are a handful of cases, very few in Washington. We had a couple state directors of Farm Service Agency. There's really more of an administrative position, even though it's a political appointment, that stay generally in those states from administration to administration, but very few in Washington, D.C. You see that happen once in a while in Department of Defense or something like that, but not very often. And I don't know that it's happened in Department of Ag. I think it's important for them to be able to have the folks that make sense for them.
Well, and there's an argument or a case to be made in the argument of let's rotate people in and out of the private sector or the public sector to give different views, fresh set of eyes. It's, Vilsack could easily say, yeah, I like what the Perdue group did. Let's keep doing that. Just like Secretary Perdue could have said, you know what, I liked what they did. This is how I like it. So when you are with loans, food assistance, the NRCS, those are 3 things that you know extremely well. We've talked about various things. I want to start with food assistance. That's a major part of a farm bill. It's like 75% is food assistance. Why is that such a hot topic for some people, having enough to eat, and the different ways to do it? I know that there was a push from USDA during your time of electronic debit cards, and that is something that had not been there before as strong. I mean, but we're used to the debit and the electronic card. Why is food assistance such a hot issue?
Well, first of all, we delivered a coronavirus food assistance program in direct payments to farmers, not food stamps, not SNAP program. Those kinds
sorry
of things.
About that. Yes,
that's actually through Food and Nutrition Services. Great crew over there. that did that. But just in general, I think the reason is that it touches so many people, across and really people in every congressional district, in every part of every state. It matters, and certainly we think agriculture is nearly everywhere, but not quite everywhere the same way agricultural production is as people eating, and people being short of food. And so that is certainly one of those things many members are brought to the Ag Committee or to a Farm Bill based on the food assistance programs, school lunch, or SNAP program, as opposed to concern about farmers, especially if they don't have farmers in their district.
The food assistance boxes, how close were you to that?
I was around it, but it wasn't delivered through me. It was delivered through marketing and regulatory programs and then food nutrition services. And so I actually got out to some of the events and saw some of them, talked to some of the producers, some of the folks putting the packages together, some of the folks receiving them. And it was really almost an emotional experience. I mean, these folks, both producers that were worried about having to throw food away, folks that were packaging and delivering that said, our restaurants are closed, our schools are closed, we don't have anything for our people to do, and we have all this equipment and the building and the know-how, and we're able to do some things now. And then to folks that drive through a line and get a box in their trunk, and maybe picking up boxes for their kids and their grandkids or their neighbors and others, no questions asked, just to be able to help. And they stood this program up in no time at all. I mean, it was weeks. In fact, Secretary sometimes would use the phraseology in the way we try to deliver programs too. He'd say weeks, not months. And he definitely had kind of private sector time frame, but he understood. The government took some time, but he did help us get stuff out the door faster than some of the experience that have been in the past. The needs were there and they were immediate, and it was important to be able to get them out.
We're recording this in late February. If you go back to late February of 2020, your calendar looked different then as it did at the end of March of 2020, a month later. How you had to quickly pivot and change some things, but frankly, food production had to continue in spite and in light of COVID. We still had to have cattle going to the packing plant and the hogs still being delivered, whether they had a market at that immediate moment. What was the pivot like for how drastic everybody's, hey, this is what I wanted to do? Because you're hitting the final strides of your administration first run, thinking, okay, I've done a year of listening, I've done a year of planning, now I'm doing a year of executing, and then that's derailed. How frustrating was that happened on your final as you were trying to implement a bunch of things?
It was really tough to watch producers having to go through this to plow produce down or not be able to get animals to a slaughter facility or and then sometimes food to be packaged for a wholesale market or a school or something like that, and wasn't appropriately packaged for a grocery store, and yet the grocery stores were short of food. And so USDA stepped in to say, with FDA, let's make sure that labeling doesn't cause us to destroy good food, especially in this special time of need. So very frustrating for everybody across the country in many different ways. Our touch at FPAC was, we have 3,000 offices. We have 20,000 employees. How do we continue our work if we can't have our offices open? We probably can't have customers coming in. We know we can't, but we probably can't even have our employees in there together as well. And in some cases, many of our NRCS folks had laptops. They did work in the field. They had information to be able to do that. They had remote connections that they could do that, a VPN that they could touch to. And yet our FSA offices, some did and some didn't. We had desktops in some cases. You don't throw a desktop in your back seat and take it home. And in some cases, people at home didn't have great connections to the internet. And we spent a lot of time making sure our offices had those connections. Now we had to think about whether people had those on their own. And so a lot of scrambling, including getting laptops to folks and others to be able to make sure that we knew the programs were getting done, our deadlines right. Do we have word out to folks? They can still call the local office. We're just rolling that phone number into somebody's home. You can still drop something by, but you're not going to see a person. You drop it in the drop box, or in some cases, people left a car in the parking lot with the window open so that they could drop it in the back seat of a car and in a box. And there were a lot of creative ways to try and make that happen. And as you say, we had another part of USDA that was saying, how do we keep our meat plants open and make sure that the employees are safe and the pigs that are coming to market, the chickens, the cattle that are coming to market have a place to go, because we're scheduled for those plants to run 95% for the next rest of the year. And there's animals behind these that are getting slowed down this week. All different versions of challenges. School lunches. How do you get lunches to kids that are home now? And they figured out ways to be able to do that. And I'm not privy to all the pieces that they did to be able to make that happen, but a lot of flexibilities really quickly to be able to get stuff done. We had to stand up a CFAP program. Congress passed that at the end of March, a CARES funding. Said, we want you to be able to help producers out there. One of the real challenges to those is it's easy to come up with the general idea. The general idea is help producers. Now the specifics are, how do you help Paul and Bill that have different situations on their farms? You're raising pigs, I'm raising corn. Our impact was different. My corn price went down, but my neighbors had his corn all sold. How do you sort through the actual specifics of delivering a program? But we were able to stand that program up, start sign up by the end of May, conducted that whole program implementation, delivery without our offices being open, and got, in that case, about $10 billion out the door, another $13 billion in the next coronavirus food assistance program, and still did our acreage reporting and the other kinds of things. Our conservation programs got crop insurance signed up for, and we even got disasters responded to when there were those out there as well.
Did the farmers need that round 2 and 3 of payments? I mean, there's the political, if I believe what I read on Twitter with some of the people that watch our program, or at least that we follow on Twitter, a wide variety, who felt that was just chasing votes, not chasing farmers.
Yeah.
And in a need that needed it, when all of a sudden, now granted, the commodity price did not, I remember having conversations on Market to Market in July. And it was like, oh, brother, where art thou, good price? It wasn't there. It wasn't until August.
Right.
Up until that point, though, there was a concern of this is buying votes.
Well, I mean, up until that, it was a concern about keeping people in business. And certainly after that, then the concern was, has the price just taken all the pain away? I would say it didn't take all the pain away. Certainly didn't for everybody take all the pain away. But you're right. These programs, we deliver them quickly, but it takes a little while to put them together. We actually set the payments for CFAP 2 by the end of July to be able to start sign up early September. It's got to run through OMB. It's got to go through interagency review, all that's set. And you just said the prices were absolutely very different at the end of July than they were by the time September rolled around, and certainly by the time December rolled around when the end of sign-up was. So, if we knew, of course, if we all knew the prices were going up, we wouldn't have sold early, right?
That's right. And we wouldn't be you wouldn't be asking, should I sell? Because I sold.
That's exactly right. But based on how things looked in summer, We certainly did not hit everything right in the first CFAP. We did not cover everybody the way they needed to be covered, and there was a lot of pain. And I don't think any of, it's hard to remember, it was less than a year ago, back in April and May, folks were talking about $10 milk for dairy as far as the eye could see. We were dumping milk, and there were all kinds of problems. A lot of things turned. People started buying it, certainly, in stores rather than in restaurants, and we had some purchases of cheese as well as support for dairy farmers, and certainly the dairy business looks very different than if we would have gone through the worst case scenario, the way things look. Now, then Congress continues to throw money at it because they hear of people hurting, and yet some things have changed. And so obviously there was another round of money in December for some more support for producers too. Now, USDA delivers the programs they're told to deliver, whether they agree or disagree with those policies. And so this administration will go ahead, I'm sure, and deliver those programs for a CFAP 3 based on the support for livestock and for crop ground, and the other support that's in there based on the direction that Congress gave.
I also want to finish here talking about the picture behind you and how your view of conservation has changed, if it at all, from where you sat in Iowa. The picture behind you is cover crop on soybeans, and it's also on corn. One thing that Tom Vilsack had told me after his first tour as Secretary of Ag, he says, Iowans view agriculture different than those in other states. I don't think you realize how an Alabama, Ohio, Oklahoma farmer views things than an Iowa farmer. Did you find a difference in the way people view conservation and the role of government in either, I'm not doing it unless you're writing me a check, I'm only going to do it because I need that soil to stay in place? Did you have any of those between Waffle House moments where you're meeting with farmers in various areas that are telling you or changing your view about conservation?
I don't know that changing it, but you do see tremendous differences. You're right, and the Secretary's right. Of course, we see differences in Iowa farmers too, right? Not every farmer thinks the exact same way about conservation. We have some cover crops on some land and not others. We have some folks that are all in, have been doing it for decades, and others that are saying it could never work on my farm. But you do see that across the country, both because weather's different, economics are different, crops are different. So it's different in the potato farmers up in northern Maine than it is in Mississippi and Louisiana. And it's logical that it's different. And I think that's one of the challenges of implementing the programs. Probably, I would argue, over time has been one of the magic around conservation programs is they have a framework. EQIP has a framework. CSP has a framework. Go into the acronym. Sorry about that, but
you were in government for a while. I understand.
I was in government, and we have acronyms. I had like 4 pages of acronyms when I got there, and we probably added to them. Right, we added a CFAP and an MFP and other things to them. But it has to be different in different states. And that's going to be one of the challenges around carbon sequestration. That's going to be different in different places. I would say one of those things I got was, I think there were a lot of folks in Iowa that had a understanding around nutrient challenges, both in local waters and waters that go down to the Gulf of Mexico, the impact of and the challenge of managing high organic matter soils for good productivity, balancing the water quality piece. And we've gone through a lot of that conversation that in some cases it's happened, Chesapeake Bay, a few other places, but in many cases it hasn't happened yet. And so I'd come across folks and they hadn't had the kind of conversation and the aha moments that Iowans have had as we saw a neighbor do some things, or we tested our own tile line water, or other kinds of things like that. So I do think there is a difference. Some of it's explainable, and some of it's just based on experience.
Well, the famous line is, "We're with the government. We're here to help." Is it going to be the government that has to carrot and stick this through?
Well, I think they're going to be there. I do think it's a challenging balance, just like taking the idea and making it a program. How do you make it a program when you and I are farming no-till across from fence from each other, but one of us says, has our land's different or whatever, should our payment rates be different or those kinds of things? And certainly across the country and different crops that are out there. I do think we're kind of one of the challenges here is we have a lot of private folks that are coming to market with different visions, and I don't know which one's right, and I don't know that all of them are right. Um, but it seems maybe government sets up kind of a general standard and still lets the private say, "I'll pay you for no-till, I'll pay you for converting to no-till," or whatever. Different companies do different things. Um, so I do think there's probably a value in government helping to set some framework, but I think we want to certainly avoid government running over some of the creativity that's already there in the private sector before it's had a chance to prove whether it's the right solution or not.
What's going to be the final? I mean, I guess this would have been the discussion for Iowa too. But what is going to be the final thing that makes the farmer on the left of the road? I shouldn't say left, on the north side of the road politically. It's not a political statement. On the north side of the road, do no-till and cover crops, and the south one not. What is going to be the final aha? I've got to do it that gets a much wider participation in conservation practices.
Yeah, I think there's a series of things, and we would talk kind of a gradation that there's an awareness that has to happen to a producer that what I do matters. And then an understanding that if I do this, it's a positive thing. Sometimes it's certainly a financial impact. It's a landlord. I do think somebody on one side of the road is going to be using green equipment. Somebody's going to be using red equipment, and that doesn't make either of them right or wrong. There can be differences, and so you can have different tillages, different systems, different crop rotations. Because I'm going to feed all my corn, I need more corn than somebody else. So I do think there'll be differences, and we need to allow for those differences. I love cover crops, but I don't think cover crops are going to be right every place in every situation. It's different in wheat country. It's different in some farm rotations than it is for others. And so I think we need to allow, the challenge here is encouraging progress, but allowing some differences to happen along the way as well.
Well, good luck on the next step. There's always the guest hosting for Market to Market sometime.
That sounds great. That's you've set a high bar there. So that's a tough place to look good compared to Paul Yeager.
Always a politician, Bill. Gosh, I love that. No, good luck on what is next. I mean, I know you're not sitting there on the farm. You're kind of active out of it. I guess I should let you can make one last blaze here. You divested yourself from the farm operation when you went into the government. Why was that not consistently held across the previous administration? It seemed from the outset there was a couple of spots where so-and-so is still involved in whatever their business was before they came into public office or worked for the government.
So I don't know specifics. And in most cases, you had to divest from anything that you had responsibility for that could affect your profitability. So for me, heck, that was conservation programs, farm programs, and crop insurance. I wasn't going to farm without all those and that opportunity. Besides, I was 1,000 miles away, so I wasn't going to be there to help when I needed to help. So it made sense. It was really good, and I think we had folks that had other family members that were doing it. We had folks that took themselves out of their business financially, and yet the business still looked the same when they weren't there. Maybe they've gotten back in, maybe they haven't. We had some other folks used it nicely to transition to the next generation. So the next generation can be farming and will be farming, and they're going to look for something else off the farm, or maybe just help driving the tractor when the grain cart's needed in the fall or something like that. And
No
I
harm
hope
there. They always need one of those.
Absolutely. Always need a grain cart driver.
Oh, that's the nice way to put it. Twitter will call it something different, but we'll leave it nice and just call it driver.
Okay.
All right. Bill Northey, thank you so much for the time. Good luck on the next venture.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Paul.
As always, if you have any tips for me, send me an email at paul.yeager, that's YEAGER, at iowapbs.org. Love to hear from you. Thank you to Bill Northey for being our guest. If you've missed some previous episodes, we talked to the former ambassador to China, Terry Branstad. We also discussed photography in rural areas with Brian Abeling. Lots of good stuff. Subscribe today, and we'll see you next time here on the MTOM Show podcast.